Madam Secretary, I reclaim my time. Stop filibustering. Stop filibustering.
By gang members of MS-13.
Will you give Mr. Abrego Garcia the due process that the Supreme Court and Judge Wilkinson has required you to give him?
Abrego Garcia is an El Salvador resident who is in his home country. If he were to come back to this country, he would be immediately removed again.
How do you know?
He has received and been treated appropriately.
So
and he is not.
How can you say he's been treated appropriately if the Supreme Court has ruled 9-0, 9-0 that he hasn't been treated appropriately? Why is your opinion better and have more authority than the Supreme Court?
Investigators, 2 judges, an immigration court that all said he was MS-13 and was removed from this country.
But you understand, that is you saying that. That is you saying that.
That is them saying that. This
no.
is investigators and law
that is
enforcement
you
officers
making that
in the case they
determination.
built against him. If you don't
the
trust our law
court
enforcement
has
officers
considered all that.
and
The judge has considered all that, Madam Secretary.
Trust if you
and
don't
if you would be
trust judges.
quiet, because I'm reclaiming my time, you are not following this court order. But let's focus on the court order, because this opinion also says that to facilitate, which the Supreme Court is requiring, is an active verb. It requires that step.
I now recognize Mr. Goldman for 5 minutes questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to go back to Mr. Kilmar Abrego Garcia's case, Madam Secretary. But my first question for you is a pretty simple one. It's basic civics. Which branch of government does the Constitution give the authority to interpret what the law is, the judiciary or the executive branch?
Sir, going forward, the interpretation of the law, you make the laws in this body. The judicial branch makes sure that they have integrity and they're applied properly to individuals.
So I'm just going to take that as the judiciary branch. Now, let's focus for a second on what the judiciary branch has said about this case. We know the Supreme Court has said 9-0 that, notwithstanding your statements under oath here today, that Mr. Kilmar Abrego Garcia was afforded due process, he was in fact not afforded due process, because then if he were, you would have seen the withholding order that did not permit him to be deported to El Salvador. Now you allege, and I guess the Attorney General alleges, that he's a member of MS-13. That may very well be the case. And if he is, now that that is a foreign terrorist organization, certainly the immigration laws would allow him, and in fact require him, to be deported. I certainly would support that. But the problem that we have here is what you allege, what Ms. Green alleges, what the Attorney General alleges, is not the judiciary. You don't get to decide whether or not he is an MS-13 member. And you don't have to take my word for it, because Judge Wilkinson, a Fourth Circuit judge, very conservative, addressed this argument. He said, the government asserts that Abrego Garcia is a terrorist and a member of MS-13. Perhaps, but perhaps not. Regardless, he is still entitled to due process. If the government is confident in its position, it should be assured that position will prevail in proceedings to terminate the withholding of removal order. Will you commit right now to give Mr. Abrego Garcia that process where you can prove your allegation that he is a member of MS-13?
Congressman, that judge that you just quoted did not say he was not a member of MS-13. Who did say that he was a member of MS-13 was law enforcement officers that encountered this individual.
Yeah, he knows that. This is a Fourth Circuit judge. He knows all of what the evidence is, and he's saying if that evidence...
So
you're not going to commit to follow this order? You won't commit to follow this court order?
By the way, he identified
Madam Secretary,
himself.
I reclaim my time. Stop filibustering.
He was surrounded by gang members of MS-13.
Will you give Mr. Abrego Garcia the due process that the Supreme Court and Judge Wilkinson has required you to give him?
Abrego Garcia is an El Salvador resident who is in his home country. If he were to come back to this country, he would be immediately removed again.
How do you know?
He has received and been treated appropriately,
and
he is not.
How can you say he's been treated appropriately if the Supreme Court has ruled 9-0 that he hasn't been treated appropriately? Why is your opinion better
We had
and
two
have more authority than the Supreme Court.
investigators, 2 judges, an immigration court that all said he was MS-13 and was removed from this country.
But you understand, that is you saying that. That is you saying that.
That is them saying that. This
No,
is
no, no, no.
investigators and law
That is
enforcement
you
officers
making that
in the case they
determination.
built against him. If you don't
The
trust our law
court
enforcement
has
officers
considered all that.
and
The judge has
investigators,
considered all that,
then
Madam
who do you
Secretary.
trust if you
And
don't
if you would be
trust judges?
quiet, because I'm reclaiming my time, you are not following this court order. But let's focus on the court order, because this opinion also says that to facilitate, which the Supreme Court is requiring, is an active verb. It requires that steps be taken. What steps have you taken to return Mr. Abrego Garcia to allow him to get due process?
Abrego Garcia is in his home country.
What
If he were to come
steps
back,
have
your
you
advocacy-
taken?
If your continued advocacy for him were to...
I'm not advocating for him.
Yes, you
I'm
are.
advocating for a
Absolutely.
court order, Madam
Gone to the
Secretary.
mat for this
The
man
court order
who's terrorizing
says
people
that
in
you
traffic
must take
with human
steps
beings.
to follow the court order. You are here under oath. What steps have you taken to return Mr. Abrego Garcia pursuant to this court order?
It's got to be extremely discouraging to be one of your constituents. To see you fight for a terrorist like this and not fight for them is extremely alarming to me.
I'm fighting for due process, and that's under the Constitution.
Gentleman's
and you
time
should
has
fight too for due
expired.
process.
The gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize.
What we just witnessed was not a routine oversight exchange. It was a full-scale constitutional showdown, a clash that stripped away every political talking point, every carefully scripted line, and left one undeniable truth on the table. When the executive branch refuses to obey the judiciary, the rule of law becomes optional. And optional rule of law is not democracy, it's power without limit. Dan Goldman didn't come into this hearing to score partisan points. He came with a simple civics question. Who decides what the law is? And before Kristi Noem could sidestep, dance around the topic, or reframe the narrative, Goldman forced her into the one answer the Constitution makes clear. The judiciary interprets the law. Not the cabinet, not the White House, not a secretary. The judiciary. But what followed after that admission is where the real chaos erupted. Because the second Goldman brought up the Supreme Court's unanimous ruling, 9-0, that Kilmar Abrego Garcia did not receive due process, Kristi Noem immediately pivoted back into talking points. She claimed he had been treated appropriately. She claimed he had been removed properly. She claimed law enforcement determined he was MS-13. And whether any of that ends up being true or not, none of it overrides the Supreme Court. None of it replaces due process. None of it empowers her to unilaterally decide guilt without following the law she took an oath to enforce. That's the core of this clash, and Goldman hammered it relentlessly. When he quoted Judge Wilkinson, a conservative Fourth Circuit judge, the pressure in that room changed instantly. Wilkinson didn't dismiss concerns about public safety. He simply said the thing every democracy requires. If the government is confident in its claims, due process will confirm it. Meaning, if the case is so strong, then prove it legally. Do not bypass the courts just because you believe you already know the answer. But Kristi Noem refused to commit to following that court order. She refused to say she would give Abrego Garcia the due process the Supreme Court demanded. She refused to acknowledge the judiciary's authority, even after agreeing minutes earlier that the judiciary interprets the law. And when Goldman pressed, she dodged, pivoted, shifted the topic to political talking points, and then, in a moment that defined the entire exchange, began attacking Goldman personally. That's when Goldman snapped back with the line heard across the hearing. If you would be quiet because I'm reclaiming my time. That wasn't just frustration, it was a constitutional demand. A demand that an executive official respect the oversight authority of Congress instead of filibustering with rhetoric. And here's the real issue that this clash exposed. This is not a debate about one man. This is not about defending or attacking a single individual. This is about whether the executive branch believes it can override Supreme Court rulings based on its own suspicions or preferences. If a cabinet secretary can ignore a 9-0 decision, then the entire foundation of checks and balances begins to crack. Goldman's central point never changed. He wasn't defending Abrego Garcia. He wasn't attacking MS-13. He was advocating for the Constitution, the very thing every member of Congress and every cabinet secretary swears to uphold. Due process is not a gift the government decides to give. It is a right, even for people accused of the worst crimes imaginable. Otherwise, the government's power becomes limitless. If you can deny due process to one citizen today, you can deny it to anyone tomorrow. What made this confrontation so explosive was that Kristi Noem repeatedly insisted that her opinion, her assumptions, and her agency's determinations somehow outweighed the Supreme Court of the United States. And when Goldman asked her directly what steps she'd taken, required steps, to comply with the court order, she didn't produce a single concrete action, not one. Instead, she changed the subject, attacked Goldman's motives, and framed his defense of constitutional rights as fighting for a terrorist. That line wasn't just misleading, it was dangerous, because when respecting due process is framed as defending criminals, democracy is already in trouble. History shows us over and over again, when governments smear calls for constitutional rights as sympathy for criminals, what comes next is repression, not justice. In the closing moments, the tension in the room reached a breaking point. Goldman wasn't fighting for a person. He was fighting for a principle. And Noem wasn't defending policy. She was defending power. This hearing wasn't really about immigration or MS-13. It was about whether the executive branch sees itself as bound by the Constitution. And today's testimony revealed a disturbing truth. Some officials believe they can override Supreme Court rulings based on their own suspicions or preferences. If a cabinet secretary can ignore a 9-0 Supreme Court ruling today, what ruling will be ignored tomorrow?